done one of these in a while, and long-time viewers of my channel may know I used to do these quite a lot. But The Last of Us 2 is a big game, and this is certainly one that is worth diving into. So, I will. Now, first things first, it seems the visceral impact of this new trailer has offended some, which may be not its direct aim, but I'm sure it's not a surprise to all involved. Making the audience feel emotions is all part of great drama, action, empathy and agency. Being uncomfortable is one such emotion that is common in the medium for games, movies, stage and pretty much anything that involves an emotional connection. I'm not going to dive into the politics of the trailer's impact on some, and obviously the subsequent portrayal of violence, impending dread, doom, or the fact that this is carried out on and by women, and of course men. I will, however, say I really enjoyed the trailer from a construction, pacing and tones point of view. Neil Druckmann is an incredibly talented storyteller, character creator and game director that could, and likely will, move into film work at some point. He understands that an engaging narrative is driven by characters' experiences and not the story per se. The killing of the two henchmen would not have us as an audience feel a euphoric, yeah, you deserved it, from the violent end they both meet, had they not committed such atrocities moments earlier. As we all cringe before the hammer blow, you also need to ask yourself this very simple question. What shocked / upset you more? A broken arm, or an arrow through the face, or a jugular being severed? Both are far worse on the men than what happened on the women. Most people are offended by the part that was the least offensive in terms of actual gore. Beyond all this though is the evocative cinematography used here, something that has been evolving within Naughty Dog for the past few games. Again, it is lifted or at least lofted here, and the composition of the technology, motion capture, hand animation touches, one-shot camera views and the set and light construction have reached a new peak in conveying the barbaric world Joel, Ellie and crew are in, and just how that affects and forces the human condition. The animal instinct of survival, the fear, the faith, the control and the cruelty. The value of life and loyalty is low here. Evidence as Lev simply leaves her to hang and is ordered to cut her down by Kara. Only the strong survive and the weak are collateral damage for those aims. I love how symbolic the trailer is to demonstrate how quickly this position of power can change. She's no victim and she stands strong at the end, both mentally and physically. The striking similarity and physical presence of the character here is very reminiscent of Terminator 2 and Sarah Connor. A character reinvented or reborn in a world they now inhabit has forced them to become something stronger and therefore more physically imposing, and this is evident in the trailer itself. You know what to expect from this tale and the game itself, so if you are offended by any of this, not made uncomfortable by it, that is a different thing entirely and intended. Then maybe this game simply is not for you, which is also fine. For those that aren't or want to see me dive in some of the highlights I can point out and effects used, but I will add, I have no direct info from the developers themselves like pretty much all my work, so some techniques and methods I mention here may be corrected by them directly. A caveat I will add just in case of that, but I have had confirmation from many, including members of Naughty Dog themselves, that I'm not as wide of the mark as some may think. Sorry for the long intro, now on with the show. Once we start, we get a great shot of the game's particle system using the rain that samples light from the flame torch. You can see the illuminated raindrops around the torch, but still see the others further away. Fire embers also in the backdrop, created from the same particle system, likely being a GPU accelerated function. These are used across the entire scene, from splashes and when the bucket is literally kicked, to little droplets off people's noses, ears and the feet of the hanging bodies. The fire itself is also very well done. Due to the dark shot and overblown lighting, mixed with some bloom here, works well for something like fire, which really needs a fluid simulation to achieve a more accurate emulation than what we get in many titles. Another fine touch is the displacement mapped floor being depressed and even sinking footsteps in as they walk. Now this is not a flat texture, but instead likely a tessellated method of geometry to give the floor footprints and indentation as they walk and drag the captured woman. Again, something we saw very similar with the floorboard technique used in Uncharted 4. This is a continuation of the method used again in Uncharted 4, such as the Jeep crash scene. As Nate moves his arm through the mud, you can see the floor move, and I mentioned this in that analysis trailer. Further on, we can see as she drops to the ground, the weight from her body and movement is portrayed in all actions. She lands with a thud and abruptness. This kind of weight and momentum of all the pivot system is again used when she's hanging from her neck. You can see the tension in her neck, but as she kicks her feet and thrashes around trying to move, the weight and momentum is coming from the bottom up rather than the top down. It's incredibly realistic, in fact totally convincing of the weight and physics here. Now these incredibly detailed touches again rise as her nose is bent by the floor contact, just showing off I'm sure here, but I love and applaud it. The skeletal rig and mesh construction looks to have far more pivot and rig points to work off, and this kind of nuanced touch is perfect for capturing the raw power or minute details of a performance. We can also see the PBR material system has received even more refinement across the wet fabric of her clothes and the beads of water on her skin. It also gives us a clean example of chromatic aberration and film grain being lightly used here, and it works on the atmosphere and visual style. Overall though, this is a much more adult in tone and creeping into photorealistic pre-rendered CGI now, although some of the exaggerated Naughty Dog style still remains. Those proxy capture systems we saw in games like The Order 1886, Uncharted 4 amongst others is also used again during this scene, being cheaper and having a wider use and conviction than screen space reflections alone. We can see the dual reflection of her as she is grabbed and pulled by the noose. The facial capture animation system here also shows huge benefits, as the fear, panic and wide-eyed glare here really allows you to feel the gravity of the situation, far more than we have before in games, aside maybe pre-rendered ones. Remember, this is all real time on a PS4 Pro system. The reflections in the scene seem to use an intelligent mix of cube maps, light emitter proxies and the capture system, which all help to reduce obvious errors with them cropping up, again pointing to this being real time. With some light use of screen space reflections, you can see how she lifts her head and the pot in the background. Just as she moves, you can see the occlusion error as she is lifted before her face passes in front of it, or when the bucket is moved in front of the burning car. Once hoisted into position on the rope, we can see the details are not simply used on the one character, as all the characters in the scene are vividly detailed and all demonstrate the same facial capture system. With them being part of a cult and sins being mentioned, the assumption by me here is our female capture is part of that very group and likely pregnant at this point. Likely a sin that has caused this ritualistic act, with Kara being within the non-believer faction. The soft light flickering shadows from multiple light sources gives the scene incredible depth and atmosphere with multiple shadow sources, which helps create more drama and tension, whilst also reducing any chance the seams behind the construction itself start to show. It is simply mesmerising to watch on a dramatic, visual and technical level. The stablemate of a good cinematic is also used here, with great motion blur, which is something they have dramatically improved here since Uncharted 4, which is one of the weakest areas of that game in its visual accomplishment at times, alongside a bokeh sampled sprite-based depth of field. The embers in the backdrop expand when out of focus as the camera pans up or when turning around. Now this focal length aperture shift is used heavily in the cinematics. You can see it here as we move onto her face as she drops, giving a short focal length, blurring the foreground and background so you can see her face in clarity. The scene plays out with a similar style to Ground Zeroes, all in the dark, rain and carried through one continuous shot. This comes from their virtual camera system for capture, but it's not the first time we have seen or will have seen this. The new God of War instance, for instance, has no cuts throughout the entire game. From all gameplay and real-time cinematics, we've been promised one continuous shot. Maybe this is the new standard. The biggest takeaway from this trailer is again Naughty Dog's sheer effort on the smallest details and just how far ahead they are in animation, lighting, materials and sheer geometry creation. The mixture of specular light reflections, rim lighting, shadow occlusion and diffuse surfaces are all on a level that would and could be passed off as movie CGI now. This is gruesome stuff, but you can see the expression of the cult leader as she realises she has no more bullets left in the gun. She drops it and starts struggling to free herself. Then she notices the hammer incoming and winces ahead of it landing. Her mouth drops and wobbles as it hits. Then we see her eyes roll back, hands drop as she dies and falls. Then our captive is left to hang once again, but you can see the muscle and fat deformation system as she tenses her neck to reduce the choking. You can also see the tension in her arms and actually her physical biceps and triceps change shape as she's tensing up and trying to struggle free. And later as she falls, you can see the vein in her forehead has now pumped up, just as you saw earlier in her arms. This girl can bench press a fair few kilos for sure. All these little touches would be missed were it not for the care lavished on them and the facial capture system in use. See as she glances at the disemboweled man hanging opposite her, as we saw earlier, as the knife is pressed against her stomach and the character talks, just to give you that glance of what's impending. The fabric simulation has also improved here, with the hood folding down, the raincoat swaying with the normal map wrinkles on her sodden army vest, or as it folds up when it's lifted and then dropped back down. You can even see separate parts of her hair with her rain sodden clumped together parts at the front, swaying on the front of her head as she hangs in the rain. Like many things in the cinematics, we will see this carry over to the full game, I'm sure. Brutal takedowns like the first game will clearly be in, and the weighted pivot system, magnificent animation, detailed models will only make this far more impactful and emotional. The sheer amount of quality, high quality composition here in these cutscenes is really impeccable. The lighting system is again sky high, as is the particle system and also the shadow system coming from the light torch and the other light sources, all giving off silhouetted and likely stencil based shadows. This has merely made me salivate for the game all the more. As a character-driven story, we have now been introduced to most likely Ellie's origin here and her mother, although this could be a very obvious red herring. Just how this plays out into the game's themes and story of hate, we will have to wait and see, which is something I am willing to do, and hopefully I can secure an early look as the team move towards a release date. The options here and the fact that they've been playing with a wide open expansive game type as we saw in Uncharted 4, they never do these things just on their own, so likely we're going to see expansion of that here in The Last of Us 2 with multiple choices through routes and maybe even far more in terms of the story situation. It may have been short, but I did want to touch on this for many aspects, and I was asked by a few people to cover this as well. The amount you can take away from the final game and the technical leaps it will have made is limited in this small cutscene. The new technology is geared around capturing and portraying a sky-high level of fidelity within those performances, and I have no doubt that once again Naughty Dog will raise the expectation bar a few notches higher when they ship the next installment. As always, I hope you guys and girls enjoyed this. If you did, then please hit the like and subscribe button, and of course share where appropriate. You guys and girls take care, and always be careful which way round that hammer falls. I'll catch you on the next one.
Yara. Demons are coming. Cut her down. She's one of them.
Lev.
Watch your backs.